right, friends, welcome to the show. This is the middle of August right now, and that means something very special is happening for us. You know, there are many people who call in to raise issues and ask questions to help them out for themselves. To gain information that will help their own spiritual lives, or maybe deal with some of the doubts they might have as followers of Christ, or they have challenges as they're engaging people who don't share their views, and they are challenging them, trying to put a stone in their shoe, and getting them to think about Jesus, because we are convinced that Jesus is worth thinking about. And when those people call in, a lot of times they'll say, hey, by the way, I'm a strategic partner. I'm thrilled to be a strategic partner. It's great to be a part of your organization. Of course, these are people who are part of the bedrock of Stand to Reason financially. These are people that have come alongside of us and become a kind of semi-permanent part of our team by committing to give, say, $25 or $50 or $100 a month, or maybe more. But the idea is every single month they're committed to do that. And we love our strategic partners because we count on them so much. It provides a stable foundation for us every month, so we know what's coming in, what we can count on, and that's why they're called strategic, because they're partners that give us a strategic advantage. And August is the month where we invite a whole bunch of new people to join ranks with the other strategic partners. We call it Be One of the 100 because we want you to be one of 100 new strategic partners who make a commitment at that level or more, 25, 50, 100, whatever's, you're capable of offering, so that you can be a regular partner with us. Now, we've done this for the last 5 years. It's kind of exciting for us because we know there are people that have been thinking about this for a while. Gee, how can I partner? Shall I become part of Stand to Reason? Yes, you can, and you can do that this month as we fill our quota of 100. Now, I know we're halfway through the month, and we've got 70 plus already, and we are thrilled at all of those people who've signed up to become new strategic partners. It gets me thinking, maybe we can break out to 200, and maybe it should be one of the 200. Anyway, that's what I'm praying for. And I know there's a bunch of you that have been thinking about this just in general, and even in the last couple of weeks as we've been announcing this, maybe you've gotten some emails or something like that, and you thought to yourself, well, yeah, maybe. Well, today's the day of salvation, right? Now's the time to strike the iron. I just want to encourage you to go to our website, str.org, and put the /partner there, or you can just go at the top where it says donate, and that'll take you there as well. And all the information is there for you to become part of our team in that way. And part of what we're trying to encourage people to think of is we want you to think of yourself as somebody who's holding the rope, so to speak, as we descend down into the darkness of this culture and make the case that Christianity is worth thinking about and train others to do the same. William Carey in 1792 had this burden to go to India, but realized he'd be descending into the abyss, opening up that entire continent, basically, that massive landmass, to the gospel, that he needed help. And he told his friend Andrew Fuller, I will go down into the pit if you will hold the rope. And Andrew Fuller did that as he became his British helper to ensure that there were funds that would sustain not just William Carey, but his whole enterprise. And over the next 20 years, Fuller remained in England and raised funds and rallied churches and wrote letters and prayed fervently for Carey's work. And of course, the rest is history. We're in the same situation. We have people holding the rope for us whether it's me or Alan Shlemon or Tim Barnett or John Noyes or Amy Hall or who am I leaving out? The Almonds now, Tripp and Megan, who are part of our team. We're all the ones actively on the front that are making our contribution. I call them the young guns here. But there's a whole bunch of other people. We have 20 on our team that are doing all the backup work, in a certain sense, holding the rope for us as we go out in the field. But you're holding the rope for them too, you strategic partners. And so when you sign up, come on board as a strategic partner, you're going to be helping the entire enterprise. And keep in mind what we do. We have speaking events across the country. We're at our staff meeting today, and we just, where is everybody this week? And we're all over the place. We have Reality Student Apologetics Conference is the first one coming up in 3 weeks in the Atlanta area. We have Red Pen Logic. That's Tim Barnett, his special contribution. He's got a whole audience of very special listeners that know little about Standardism, but they know Tim. Well, Tim's out there at the end of that rope doing RPL because you're holding the other end. Strategic partners are. We have STRU. We have the call-in radio show. You're listening to it now. We have our outposts that Tripp Allman is responsible for now. We got all kinds of things going on, and none of that could happen without you. I'm just saying. All right. Yeah, we sell some books and odds and ends, but that just kind of pays for the books and odds and ends and the place to store it. We're not making any money on that. We are sustained because of those who give, and the ones that are most important are strategic partners. So here's my challenge. Be one. Be one of the 100. Actually, be one of the 200. How about that? If you've been thinking about it, now's the time. Just go to str.org/partner. And when you signed up, we are going to send you a gift. But it's a gift that's going to help train you because that's our commitment. All right? We're going to send you the Tactics Bundle, the Tactics book, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions, the Street Smarts book, using questions to answer Christianity's toughest challenges, and then we're going to also send you a PDF download of the Tactics Field Guide. We kind of put it all together in a quick access kind of way. We're giving that to you because that's a way of saying thank you right out of the gates. And by the way, those 2 books are all signed by me, just saying. But it's a way of saying thank you out of the gates, and it's also a way of equipping you, as is our commitment, to continue equipping those people in our broader community to be more effective ambassadors for Christ. Once again, str.org/partner, or you can just go to str.org and you'll see the donor portion at the top. I think it's part of the top band up there, and we'll have you on board. Glad to have you on board. Let's finish this month out. Let's hit that 200, all right? You can help us do that. All right. Kind of in line with that, I have Alan Shlemon on board, and if you know anything about Standardism, you know about Alan Shlemon, because you weren't gray at all, Alan, I don't think, when you started out, what, as a volunteer?
That's right. Yeah, 1999, I think it was.
Yeah,
no, 1998.
Yeah, it was like that was the year I got married, and you
same year I got married as well.
Oh, there you go. So, of course, we took advantage of you for a number of years. You were unpaid staff.
That's right.
And finally, we had to pay you, and you've been you are our senior apologist now. In terms of seniority and, of course, the things you've done. You've got a heavier schedule than I do. I mean, it's amazing to me, all that you do, Al. And some people know because of their exposure to Standardism, our website, some of the things that you specialize in. And I want to talk about a couple of those areas that you made recent contributions into that really help Christians make sense of ethical issues in our culture, given the challenges, and also some challenges to Scripture, because you've written a recent Solid Ground. I think, what did it come out in beginning of the year, January.
Well, the solid ground on what is a man and what is a woman was in January, yeah.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the one about scripture is a more recent article.
Yeah, that's the second one. So that's actually a completely different area. It gives a little bit of visibility of your range, but just to make the connection here, Alan's at the other end of the rope that you guys are holding. So he is able to do all that he's able to do because we have strategic partners that are making their contribution.
And Greg, I'll point out, I think I became, well, before we even had the term strategic partner, I became a donor back in 98, in fact.
Ah, yeah.
So I am you sold me on that intro about being a strategic partner. I bought into it, but 20 years ago.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And by the way, how long have you been officially on staff now? It's been almost
20 years. 2004 is when I joined. So this October will be 21 years.
Yeah, okay. And you had a chance to do deep dives in very challenging areas in Islam, for example. I mean, you know your stuff there. Whenever we have a question, when I'm writing a book, I go to Alan if I have a question about that area. He'd done a deep dive in ethical issues like abortion, and you do training on that and take young people after you train them out into just out on the street basically and engage people on these topics. I think not Seattle, but Portland. Yeah, is where you've been doing that for years. Tell us about I went to Egypt about 12 years ago to teach for the Focus on the Family students something or other and had a really great time. And then you have taken over that project every year. So you've been going ever since then, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's been a privilege to serve that community of people because it's basically the church in Egypt, composed of both Orthodox and Protestant Christians. And basically this group that you're talking about tries to identify up-and-coming pastors or leaders in the Egyptian church, takes them into a place like, say, Beirut, or last year we were in Montenegro, but wherever. And then we train them in theology, in apologetics, in hermeneutics, so they can go back to Egypt equipped and more thoroughly prepared to serve their congregations.
Which is it's a tough mission field just in general.
Yeah.
But it's smart, though, that you're working with people who are culturally near. It isn't like gringos, go out there, Americans, whatever, and we're going to tell them how to do it. No, we do train, but we are training them to do this kind of, in a sense, missions work. But for them, it's not missions. It's just in their culture, but they're culturally near, so they're much more effective. They know the language. They know the people. They know the customs. And it was a great experience for me the first time I went. And I am glad that you've picked up the baton on that one, Alan, because you're so much more familiar with the culture and the theologies that they're going to be facing, and you're Middle Eastern yourself in terms of your ethnicity. So, I mean, the way I joke is he looks like a terrorist, so he's the best one. Yeah. So anyway, and then your deep dive into all of the gender issues, homosexuality and transgenderism and gender dysphoria and all that, and all the writing that you've done. If you want to know, friends, anything about any of those issues and a host of others, Alan has written so much stuff or done so many presentations that are resident at str.org that you can really get up to speed. I want to talk about two pieces. We mentioned them already that are in different areas. And the first one is this piece that's titled, What is a Man and What is a Woman? Now, there's, in a certain sense in our culture, there's fighting words now. Because this is not, give us a little background on what is going on in our culture regarding those concepts.
Well, a lot is going on, and there's a lot of confusion about what seems to be a really simple question, which is the question, what is a woman? What is a woman? And of course, the corollary one, what is a man? And, it almost seems like it came out of, well, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it feels like it came out of nowhere. Like 5 or 7 years ago, all of a sudden, transgenderism became this really trendy topic. It was in the news. People are identifying as transgender or non-binary. And then, of course, questions began to arise like, well, okay, yeah.
Let me jump in for a second because my sense, and I want to know what your response is, that there was an explosion right after a Obergefell decision of SCOTUS making same-sex marriage legal. That was 2015. It was 2015, as I recall, that
Yeah.
Bruce Jenner walked across the stage in that blue gown in Hollywood and received the Arthur Ashe Award for courage, which strikes me, it doesn't take a lot of courage to come out transgender in Hollywood. They should have given that to a pro-lifer. But
Right.
in my sense, you said like 6 or 7 years ago, it seems to me that 2015 was a dividing point. Do you have any opinion about that?
Well, sure, yeah, because that's when same-sex marriage was legalized, and it was almost as if, okay, well, now they've completed that mission on sort of homosexuality and same-sex marriage. So it seemed like, the next step is to move on to the transgender question.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
thought that was going to be all over with. I thought it was, okay, all of this stuff is going to die down. They got what they wanted. Transgender dysphoria is almost non-existent in the human population statistically, or had been the case. And so I just thought, okay, we're going to get a breather on here, but we didn't. All of a sudden, there's this explosion you're talking about.
yeah, and I think, I mean, it probably took a couple of years to get up to speed. Certainly there was people who identifying as transgender even at that point and prior to it, of course. But it really became, first of all, a social contagion as well as a trendy thing. And of course, more people were identifying as transgender after that.
Can you explain that word, social contagion,
Well,
for those who may not be familiar with it?
yeah, just the idea that people can be influenced by their peers, by social trends, to think that something, to be affected by what's going on in culture. And so there's been studies done on this question, which is, why are there so many, for example, girls now identifying as non-binary or transgender? And although there are true instances where people have genuine psychological conditions or issues or trauma that have caused questions about their own gender identity, there's also an element in which people who do not have any sort of trauma or abuse or history of autism or other kinds of mental health issues are experiencing and claiming to be transgender in massive groups of people, like at schools and in social media. And it seems like it's not based upon any sort of medical kind of condition, but rather because of a trendy social desire to sort of participate in what everybody else is doing. I want
Kind
to
of a fad.
yeah, like a fad,
Yeah,
exactly.
Simply. Huh.
Yeah. So not all of it is social contagion, but
Right.
some of it absolutely for sure is.
Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage, chronicles a lot of that, as I recall, and she uses the term too, social contagion. So
Yeah, I remember talking to a psychiatrist who said to me, a lot of people who are coming into his clinic were saying they're transgender, but when he did evaluations on them, he wasn't finding any evidence of gender dysphoria per se, or any other kind of conditions that might contribute to something that would make them think they're transgender. And what he realized is that it just seemed like transgender was something that was trendy amongst his population of students that were coming into his clinic. And he even said, it's like transgender is the new black. Like it was the new trendy thing to be. Not that you can identify as black, although
Yeah.
I guess there are one or two examples of people who did that. But
yeah, well, there was a time when it was kind of trendy to be gay, and
right.
then it became trendy to be bi, and now gay and bi don't get you any social status anymore. Now it's transgender that gets you that. And in fact, I recall a testimony that was given to somebody who was just down and out. A woman was really down, teenage girl, totally down and out. I'm just giving you a thumbnail sketch here. And going through the kind of emotional problems that teenage girls encounter naturally, and then wondered, gee, maybe I'm transgender, which is the narrative that she's picking up from others. And the moment that she so-called came out as transgender, her world changed. All of a sudden, she's the favorite of the crowd.
Sure.
She's being applauded and encouraged. So you have this incredible social pressure. Not pressure is the right word, but reinforcement of going in this direction for very sensitive or people who are very sensitive to what's the right social pressure, peer approval. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so it's going to have this kind of effect. And it wasn't until that whole thing kind of got a little stale for her that she realized, all right, well, I guess I'm not that anymore. Not really. That was just a thing. The problem is with a lot of young ladies, they realize this after they've had surgery that has removed parts of their body so that they look more like boys instead of girls.
Yeah. That's super tragic, and that's one of the things that we're obviously a lot of people are concerned about. Even non-Christians are concerned about this. So there's a whole group of atheists, evolutionists, and even people who identify as gay and lesbian are very against transgender ideology, and partly because they see transgender ideology as sort of preying upon people who would otherwise be identified as simply gay and lesbian. So a girl, for example, 20 years ago, who is identified as a tomboy, maybe she engages in gender nonconforming behavior, maybe she likes hockey or football and plays with the boys, like that girl would be identified as a tomboy and then maybe grow up to be a lesbian. But today, transgender ideology wants to kind of seduce this girl into thinking, no, she's probably non-binary or transgender. And so it's interesting to see lots of lesbians, people who identify as lesbian and gay, saying, this is not right. These are people who don't have gender dysphoria in the way you would say it is, and yet they're being enticed to identify as transgender and non-binary, and then, like you said, Greg, go through the various steps that a lot of organizations would say are first social transitioning, hormonal transitioning, and then surgical transitioning.
Or gender affirming care.
Surgical transitioning entails, they call it gender confirmation surgery.
So it's almost like, it is a curious thing that you have these groups that kind of have their own identity, their own, in a certain sense, political agenda. I don't mean that pejoratively. I'm just trying to describe here. And then have them complain because now you've got a competing group or a mentality or a trend that is siphoning off their people into a different group, and so they lose their influence. I mean, that's all I can think of that would be objectionable. We're losing our influence because if people that just want to be transgender instead of being gay or lesbian, why should anybody care, especially from that group of people who say, essentially, do your own thing. You be you, be your authentic self, all that. This is part of their sloganeering. But so it must be political that they're offended because now we don't have as many. It's like kind of having a party split. So one party splits into two parties. They can't win an election, because that divides the vote, kind of deal. So, that's very interesting to hear that there is this kind of objection. At least at some level, it is identifying what they think is an illicit or illegitimate distinction that's being created because of social pressure. Is that the way you take it?
I think it's true that maybe the LGBT community now is separated with LGB and then the T is separated.
Yeah.
And so you're right. Maybe they lose some influence because they're not a united front anymore. I mean, perhaps there is some motivation there for that reason. But I also want to admit that there are people who are genuinely troubled that identify as gay and lesbian, who are genuinely troubled by the fact that people, especially young kids, are encouraged to go through these 3 stages of transition. Social, hormonal, and surgical transition, which is resulting in, as you mentioned, Greg, it's a euphemism for the amputation of perfectly healthy sex organs. Yeah. And so these people who identify as gay and lesbian are acknowledging this is abuse. This is mutilation of children's bodies, or even of adult bodies later. But still, they're very troubled by this. So it's not just that they see it as we're losing members to our, LGBT kind of political group.
Yeah, maybe that was uncharitable on my part, but it was just a reflection. So for your input on that.
Sure, I'm sure there's something to be said about that, but I think there are a lot of people who are troubled by that. I mean, Camille Paglia, who is a well-known thinker in this area, she's not a Christian. She identifies as a lesbian. She says, look, anyone who collaborates into an intrusion into a developing child's body or mind is guilty of child abuse, a crime against humanity.
Wow.
I mean, so her and many, many other non-Christians are people who actually follow that are leading the charge against transgender
So
ideology.
it's kind of like here are non-conservative people, politically, ethically, whatever. In other words, they don't fall into that camp. That's not their motivation, but they see what is obvious to any casual observer. It also strikes me as interesting because this whole transgender thing has morphed into this massive catalog of alternate genders. I guess in Google they have, what is it called?
Alternate gender identities, you mean?
Yeah, like 60 different ones.
Right.
Those who are suffering from gender dysphoria are still acknowledging, essentially, there are exceptions to this, but binary sexuality. I'm a man in a woman's body, or I'm a woman in a man's body. That the basic confusion of dysphoria is still binary. That they realize, well, they're two sexes, but something got mixed up and the wires got crossed, and so they've got a problem, which is another thing. They are acknowledging there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, if some will also say they're non-binary, so they'll say they're neither male nor female, they're something else. And technically speaking, gender dysphoria is simply the distress someone experiences when they sense a mismatch between their body and their gender identity. But that gender identity doesn't have to be either male or female. It could be anything, really.
But I have a question about this. No, that's a very good point and a very good distinction. But even though technically speaking you could make that distinction, is that characteristically the distinction that's being made with gender dysphoric people? Are characteristically they're dysphoric about their own sex, gender, they're a man with male genitals, and they are dysphoric, but they don't like that. So they just go to all different places. Or is it characteristically it's going to the opposite sex in terms of their gender identity?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I know. I'm sure there's studies that have researched that question. I've never looked into the answer to that question. But you're right. It does seem like for a large number of people who I read about and who talk about their experiences online and share with the world, it does seem like, they're, like Ellen Page, female actress, and now she identifies as Elliot Page, right? So it's like she went from female to identifying as a boy or a male. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it could be the case that the vast majority are still going from one sex to the other, or at least identifying as the other, and not just anything. But technically speaking, the definition for a transgender person would simply be a person whose gender identity doesn't fit with their body, with their biology.
Yeah, got it.
But that gender identity could be male, it could be female, it could be neither, both, or something else.
Yeah, my suspicion is, and I've said this before, when people say, well, gender is fluid, and you could be an ampersand for that. I don't even know if that's on the list. But why not? Why can't I be a colon? No, a colon is a body part too. So why can't I be a comma? I could be an Oxford comma. It's a literary device. Okay, why not? Because gender is fluid. Now, my response is, no, gender is not fluid. And we're going to talk about that in just a second when we talk about sexuality, how many sexes there are. What's fluid is somebody's imagination. Just because imaginations are fluid, right, and people can come up with, where in the whole world ever have people come up with all of these variations? This to me is a recent development, mm-hmm, historically, clearly, and it is evidence of creativity and imagination. It is not genuine, with the exception of gender dysphoria, male-female binary gender dysphoria, which has been around for a while. All the rest of these possible genders, to me, this is imagination is fluid, but not genders. So I don't know if he wants to respond to that. But.
Well, no, I mean, I think you're right. Imagination is fluid. And as Carl Trueman has talked about in his books, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self and Strange New World, mm-hmm, with the rise of expressive individualism, which is the idea that we would give complete and total authority to your inner thoughts, then, of course, if your imagination has just run wild and you believe yourself to be whatever, and you give authority to that inner thought, that inner belief about who you are, then, of course, you can be anything or identify as anybody or anything.
Yeah, or nothing.
Yeah, or nothing. Yes,
Yeah, it's
or
goofy.
non-binary.
So
Yeah,
you wrote this piece, which I thought was superb. And the title was "What is a Man? What is a Woman?" And basically, you offer the argument, and I'm choosing my words carefully because you've offered an argument. In other words, if people disagree with this, they're going to have to take exception with the particulars that you laid out. You offer the argument that there are only two sexes. And medically, this is not controversial.
right.
And scientifically, this is not controversial. And there are means to determine which sex is which, or which sex you are.
That's
And
right.
very obvious ones, and in ambiguous cases, you can take a closer look, if I could put it that way,
Right.
because that's what ends up happening. So could you cash out a little bit in a thumbnail sketch the case that you made there in that piece, which is
Yeah.
available, by the way, at str.org. What is a
Right.
man? What is a woman?
Right. Yeah. So
so-
so I give a biblical explanation first, which probably is more obvious to many of our listeners, right? That the Bible teaches that God created humans as only male and female, right? But then, as you pointed out, I also point to the medical and scientific evidence that this is the case. And we've known that there are only two sexes, male and female, for a long time now, and it's based upon simple, basic anatomy and physiology.
Mm-hmm.
And we know there's only two sexes because there's only two kinds of gametes. Now, a gamete is just a fancy word for a reproductive cell. So a sperm is a gamete, that's a reproductive cell, and an egg is a gamete, which is also a reproductive cell. Now, humans can only produce either sperm or egg. Those humans that produce sperm, we call them males. Those humans that produce eggs, we call them female.
Yeah, and pardon my chuckle, but it's almost like no duh, right?
That's right.
And this is what is so amazing about this thing, and I want you to continue. I'm just jumping in with this thought that the basics are so basic that it doesn't take a degree. It isn't like, I'm not an obstetrician or what are that
I'm not a biologist.
biologist. I said, what's the difference between male? I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not a biologist. And so
Yeah.
it's like, he should have said, do you want a dog? Oh, yeah, I have a pet dog. Are you a
Are you a vet?
veterinarian?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, it's so crazy. But part of what I just want to interject is you said, I went to the biblical material first, and then I go to the medical and scientific. And I can understand your reason why, especially with the audience.
Yeah.
But I think there's especially when you're dealing broadly with the culture, all the biblical material does is tell us why reality that is available to everyone to observe is the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need a Bible to know that there are male and female. This is a matter of medical scientific examination. What the Bible tells us is why it's like that, because God made it that way for a particular purpose. So just jumping in with that.
Yeah, sure. So those those humans that create sperm are males. Those humans that create eggs are female. And notice, there's no other possible gamete. There's no other possible reproductive cell that could be produced by a human being. You either produce sperm or you produce egg. There's no third type of gamete. There's no in between a sperm and an egg, like a speg, right? If there were like a third gamete or a fourth gamete, maybe we could say there are three sexes or four sexes, but we don't. We don't have more than two gametes. We only have sperm and egg, which is why we've always known that there are only two sexes, because that's the only two kinds of gametes that a human can produce. And by the way, just because someone doesn't have the ability to produce sperm or egg does not now somehow nullify that classification. And the example I think I give in the pieces, I say, look, humans are classified as bipedal, which means we walk on two legs, right? But if somebody was born without a leg or they lost a leg in an accident, we wouldn't all of a sudden throw out the bipedal classification for humans and be like, okay, well, there's a spectrum of pedals, or we're unipedal. Like, we would never do that, simply because there's an exception, it doesn't mean we throw out the classification. And in the same way, simply because there are individuals who are intersex, which means means a lot of things, but generally, like if they can't produce sperm or eggs because of some sort of anomaly, it doesn't all of a sudden throw out our classification of humans as being a sexual binary.
Yeah, I want to get to intersex in a few minutes, but so given that biologically and medically there are only two sexes determined by the, I'm going to use this more broadly, that they are designed, or they're the kind of, I don't want to say have the ability to produce sperm or egg, because they don't all have the ability, but there are bodies are the types of bodies that, when healthy, would do that. And the distinction is really clear between them. So then how would you answer the question that was famously asked? I'm trying to remember the guy. You'll remember it. What is a woman? There's a documentary on that.
Oh, Matt Walsh in the documentary.
Matt Walsh.
What is a woman? It's called What is a Woman, I think.
What is a man and what is a woman, which apparently the folks on the other side, nobody was able to answer that, because on their view it's too confusing, a question, but it ought to be answered. If somebody says, I am a man or I am a woman, and they're transgender, then they've got to have some kind of definition in view. So how would you answer that in light of this medical and scientific reality of only two sexes?
Yeah, well, that documentary has Matt Walsh asking a bunch of transgender ideology advocates. And of course, other people outside the documentary have also tried to answer the question. And usually their answer is very circular. So they'll say something like, well, a woman is simply anyone who identifies as a woman.
Right.
Of course, you're saying, yeah, but what are they identifying as?
Correct.
And besides,
or feels like a woman.
That's right. Or feels like a woman, which makes you wonder, like, how would they know what a woman feels like if they're not one, right? But anyways, but the problem with that definition is probably many people who are listening recognize is that's completely circular. It'd be like if you asked me, Alan, how do you define nuclear energy? And I said, well, nuclear energy is any energy derived from a nuclear source.
Yeah.
You'd be like, well, that's completely unhelpful, right? Because it's just circular, right? So at the end of the end of the documentary, Matt walks up to his wife and says, honey, do you know what a woman is? And she says, yeah, a woman is an adult human female. And then the documentary ends soon after that. So that's the most straightforward definition. A woman is simply...
Of course, isn't there a little bit of ambiguity about the word female, though, now? Because that needs a descriptor.
That's right.
And that might be characterized in the function of females.
That's right.
Because human beings are binary sexuality by nature, as are all mammals.
Right.
So, okay, so that means a female is the kind that reproduces another human being from her own body, characteristically,
right.
As a rule, and by as a rule, and by nature,
Yeah.
Does
so
that.
In my piece, I kind of go onto what you're saying there is, and that is I try to kind of unpack a little bit more the details of what that definition would look like. And now I'll admit my definition isn't as simple and doesn't roll off the tongue, as simply an adult human female, which is nice to just say if you're just kind of in a pinch. But if you want to be more precise, the way I said it in the article is I said a woman is an adult human whose body is organized around two related functions. The first is the production, storage, and delivery of eggs. And the second is the gestation of another human being.
Yeah.
And so the reason why I say it that way is I say that a woman is a human whose body is organized around, is generally organized around, meaning even if she's missing a fallopian tube or has an underdeveloped breast or something's amiss, her body's still generally organized around the production, storage, and delivery of eggs and the gestation of another human being.
And so therefore the definition of a man would be the counterpart.
Right. Okay. It would be the production an adult human whose body is organized around the production, storage, and delivery of sperm.
Okay, so I want to ask one more question on this topic before we move to the next topic. So the next, and that has to do with the Gospels, all right, and Jesus. So it's a totally different kind of topic, which is really interesting. But intersex, okay. Now, I was of the opinion that initially that intersex was something that was in between the two sexes. In other words, not male, not female, but somehow half and half because of physical anomalies, whatever. My sense is, after reading your piece, that an intersex person is not in between two sexes, but they're, because of the a number of anomalies, some of it biological and anatomical, there is an ambiguity about which sex that individual is, which ambiguity can be cleared up with further analysis.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that doesn't change. Intersex is not like a third, kind of half and half, whatever.
That's right.
Not a speg, obviously, but
sure. And the word, and a lot of people think that because the term intersex, I think, is kind of a misnomer, because inter suggests between, sex between the sexes, as if there's other sexes in between the male and female. Right. So to me, it's sort of a misnomer, but whatever. That's the current medical jargon that's used. But the word intersex just refers to people who have variation of different chromosomal makeups or biological or physiological anomalies pertaining to their sex organs, which, as you said, makes it a little bit ambiguous as to whether they're male or female, or they might have more male or female characteristics depending on whether they're male or female.
Yeah, it's not just XY chromosomes, though. There's more to that than that.
That's right.
Could be. Yeah,
that's right. But your point with the point is that these represent, and the way I characterize it is this: it represents variations within the binary male and female sexes. So intersex is not a third sex, it's not a spectrum of sexes. It just simply represents variations within the binary sexual categories of male and female.
And just to underscore, go ahead.
I was going to say, so males have certain intersex conditions, and females have their own intersex conditions, but there's still males and females who have these conditions.
Right. And this is a medical scientific assessment. It is not a theological assessment. It's just the brass tacks, and it's uncontroversial, too, for those who are in the field. All right, let's change gears here, because you wrote a really interesting piece. So the first was Solid Ground, and that's about 3,500 words, and those come out every other month. But alternating months, I write a mentoring letter, and Alan also puts out a letter that gets posted on our website. And this one is titled, "Did the Disciples Embellish Jesus' Identity Over Time?" Tell us what that's about.
So it's a common objection raised by atheists, skeptics, and Muslims. So recently, I most heard it from Alex O'Connor, who's perhaps one of the most kind of up-and-coming rising stars of atheism. But Bart Ehrman has said this, and lots of Muslim apologists make this claim, and that is they look at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and they say, okay, well, which one was written first, which one was written last? And most scholars would say Mark was written first, perhaps in the 60s or 70s. And then John was written, last, probably in the 90s or so. Now, it doesn't matter when those dates actually are, whether conservatives might give a different dating. But the point is that, for the most part, everybody agrees Mark was first, John was last. And what they do is they look at the Christology described by the author in, say, Mark and in John. And in Mark, it seems like Jesus is described as simply a messianic figure who's meant to fulfill prophecy. He dies, he's crucified. There's an empty tomb. But when you look at John's Christology is much higher, they claim. They say John makes all kinds of references or statements about Jesus, like that he is pre-existent. He says, before Abraham was, I am, right? Mm-hmm. I and the Father are one. And so there's much more, there's post-resurrection appearances, whereas in Mark, if you look at the shorter ending of Mark, it kind of ends with the empty tomb, but there isn't any post-resurrection appearances. Whereas in John, there's lots of post-resurrection appearances. And so they say, well, gosh, it just seems to be that there is a higher Christology exhibited in the Gospel of John than there is in Mark. And so then they ask the question, okay, well, what best explains this difference? A lower Christology earlier on and a higher Christology later on. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of them say, well, it must be a legend has crept in. Maybe there's been theological embellishment, or there's some myths going on. It kind of reminds me, Greg, of I don't know if you. Well, I do know that you remember this, but the Jesus Seminar.
Sure.
They often made this distinction between the Jesus of history and the Christ of faith. Like
Right.
there was a real man named Jesus, but he was purely a human person, maybe a messianic figure, but this is different than the Christ of faith that religious Christians believe in, a divine Son of God, pre-existent, so on and so forth, miracle working God, So they make this distinction, and that's basically the claims that there must have been some sort of an evolution of Christology, which entailed theological embellishment or legend.
So a whole bunch of questions come to mind about this. This is a presumption that John is late. Okay, that John is the last gospel, which I think most people acknowledge John is the last gospel.
Yeah.
These Matthew, Mark, Luke are called the synoptics because they see things the same way largely. They're overlapping a lot. They borrow from each other. It seems like Matthew and Luke borrow from Mark, and that's the foundation. That's why they think Mark came first, whatever.
Right.
But why? But in John's gospel, there is the internal evidence that the writer of that gospel, whoever it is an eyewitness of the events themselves. Because he talks about what he does. And, in the Gospel, chapter 20, I think there's a very direct personal reference. It's the gospel, the disciple that Jesus loved, but it looks like, and maybe I have to dial down on this a little bit myself, but it looks like it is the individual. There is an individual that's writing, making reference to himself as the disciple Jesus loved, but not naming himself, but is somebody present in all this. So a person who presumes that this was a high Christology, later reflecting accretions of myth over the, 40 or 50 years, that isn't much time for mythology, just saying. Even C.S. Lewis noted that.
Well, it might be actually 30 years, even according to I think liberal scholars.
Okay. Oh, even by them.
Because
okay,
like 60
good.
or 65 would be Mark, and then maybe 90, 95 would be John.
Okay. That strikes me as late for Mark for other reasons, but nevertheless, even so, you've got, why would they presume that John, that the writer is not writing accurately what he experienced in Jesus' discourse, writing the things that he said Jesus said that the other synoptic writers didn't do that? Why would they presume that he is not getting it right? Because they would have to presume that. He's got a higher Christology that is not the same Christology as the earlier writers.
That's right. But they would just say, well, because, after decades of time, people talking about Jesus, there was an evolution in what they perceived Jesus did and who he was.
Okay, so, but what I'm getting at right now is they are making an assumption that there is an evolution of things. We're going to take exception.
Sure.
You're going to take exception with that in just a moment. But
yes.
But it just seems to me they're starting out with a presumption that itself is not justified. Well, it's tied to the higher view of Jesus that seems to be reflected in John. But why would they say that? I guess they say because maybe it's not in the synoptics and it is in John, so it must be added. Is that the way you would take it?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could say, they're just kind of presuming that. I mean, it seems like they're engaging in what we would call abductive reasoning, abductive reasoning. So they're saying we have a set of facts, we have some data here, and we're going to ask what's the best explanation for this data. Okay. And so they see what appears to be a low Christology in Mark and a high Christology in John, and so they say, well, what best could explain that? And so of course there's lots of theories that could explain it, but one of them is there's been theological embellishment over time. Okay,
good. Well, we'll just take it at face value then. Yeah. But you, in your piece, which is excellent, it's not very long. It's probably, 1,200 words or something like that. You give the reasons why you don't think there's a low Christology in other Gospels, especially Mark, which is, by everybody's account, the first one, and therefore there isn't the big difference in Christology between them, and therefore there's no reason to think to draw the conclusions that Alex O'Connor and others have drawn.
That's right. Yeah. So my the point I'm making is actually based upon a tactic that you've taught, Greg, which is just the facts, ma'am. Right. Yeah. So it's like whenever you're presented with an objection, you ask, well, let's just look at the facts. And to me, what's interesting about the solution to this challenge is that all you got to do is just read the Gospels and take note of the Christology in Mark. And so when you look at Mark, you see, all right, Jesus does all kinds of things that indicate his divine status. So He's able to heal people, right? Paralytics. He's able to raise the dead. He's able to forgive sins, right? He's able to have power over creation. He can multiply food. He can walk on water. He can calm the storm, right? And then even in Mark, there's that passage where he quotes Daniel, where Daniel is talking about a divine figure who is sitting at the right hand of the throne of God. I forgot how it's and he's coming on the clouds, right? Like a son of man. Well, of course, this is a divine description, and Jesus attributes that description of Daniel's divine person to himself.
Yeah.
Right? So there's all these elements that demonstrate that even the gospel writer of Mark perceived Jesus as a divine figure, somebody who's clearly more than just a human being.
So just to make a qualification here, some people might say, well, I don't believe that Gospel of Mark is accurate anyhow. We are not talking about the accuracy. We are talking about the literary forms reflected in each of these words. And if they say that you have a literary form, we have a high Christology in John, but not in Mark, then we just have to show that in the literary production of Mark, whoever did that regarding whatever, he's giving a high Christology. Now, what's important, significant to me, and you raised this, is that, and this to me is like a mic drop kind of moment. Why was Jesus executed? They couldn't find any evidence against him. So the high priest asks him straight out, are you the Christ, the Son of God? Now, those are two separate things, and it is not a crime to say you're the Christ, the Messiah. But it is to say you're the Son of God. And then the high priest tears his robes, and he says, this man has blasphemed. What's the blasphemy? The high Christological comment that Jesus made as the Son of God. Right. And then, to your point, Jesus doubles down. He said, oh, and another thing, you will not see me again until you see the Son of Man coming with power and glory in the clouds, and citing the Daniel passage. You will not see me again until you see me there doing that. And so, wow, he doubles down. But I noticed something else, because after I read your piece, which was fabulous, and we talked a little bit about it, and it's an important issue if you're engaging in discussions that are current regarding the reliability of these documents as being an accurate characterization of the life and claims of Jesus of Nazareth. I noticed something else. What I just cited, and you alluded to just a few moments ago, was the end of Jesus' life. Okay, if you look at the Gospel of Mark, I don't know if you noticed this. Here's how the Gospel of Mark starts. The beginning of the Gospel of Jesus, the Son of God. That's the very first line. Right. What do you call that? That's a high Christology, right? That's right. And then what's the next line? And I should probably, I kind of can paraphrase it. Matthew, Mark, Luke here, I'm just turning to it. But I could just paraphrase it, but I'll just read it for
accuracy's sake.
Accuracy and power.
That's right.
Oh, come on. There are too many pages in Matthew to get to little Luke here. There it is, Mark. Okay, almost. Okay. Verse 1, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So there you got Messiah in there. Right. The Son of God. Whoa. Verse 2, as it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you. Who's that messenger? We learn, John the Baptist. Okay, who will prepare your way, the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of the Lord. That is, of Yahweh. That's the verse. Right. And John the Baptist, who's making the way, preparing the way to introduce the Lord, points at Jesus, and he says, that's the guy. So here in the very first testimony of the life of Jesus, by everyone's acknowledgement, the lowest Christology, the Gospel of Mark, the first two verses, or three verses now, identify Jesus as God twice. And then he ends his gospel with Jesus being executed because he claimed to be that divine individual. What are these guys reading? I don't get it. And all in between, they have all the things Jesus did that you identified. You made a comment, too, I think in your piece, you said about 2 more minutes or so, but about the epistles, because the epistles predate
That's right.
the Gospels.
Yeah, I think this is actually the death knell to their objection, because if you look at, say, Philippians, which even non-Christian scholars acknowledge was written before Mark, Philippians probably has some of the highest Christology in all of the New Testament, because you have that famous passage in Philippians chapter 2, where it says Jesus, who existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, and so on and so forth. Well, there you have Jesus, who is a divine being, right? He's God. He's with God. He existed. He's a pre-existent form of God. And so, I mean, these
Stepping
are all
down out of heaven.
That's right. These are all the things that Alex O'Connor specifically has said. Like, you don't have, in Mark, Jesus being a divine pre-existent God. Well, in Philippians you do, and this predates. Yeah. This is before Mark. Yeah, that's right. So the idea that this Christology evolved, of course, is completely undermined just by looking at Philippians, and that's not
Plus
even.
Plus, you have that verse there at the end of that section where every knee shall bow and every tongue confess Jesus is Lord, which is a verse seized out of the Old Testament, applying to Yahweh, and now Jesus' name is inserted. I'm jumping in here because I got 50 seconds, and thank you so much, Alan.
Sure.
It's wonderful, just wonderful talking with you, and I think you brought all kinds of clarity to these issues, and this is what we do. Alan, Tim, John, Tripp, Megan, Amy, me, this is what we do. Where are we? We're all at the end of that rope. We're all down there in the abyss doing our job with somebody else holding the other end. That's our strategic partners. All the more reason that we want you to become a strategic partner. Does this all make sense to you, what Alan just said, as an example of what we do? Yeah, of course it makes sense. Okay, then join our team to continue to make this kind of thing possible. str.org/partner, or just go to str.org and click on the donate section there at the top, and it'll take you right to the page. I'm shooting for 200. Being one of the 200, we're almost to 100. We want to be 200 by the end of the month. Join our team. $25, $50, $100 a month. We'll send you those tactic books and Street Smarts books signed by me, and also the Tactics Field Guide, okay? And you'll be a member of our wonderful cadre of strategic partners. All right, friends, that's it for this hour. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, folks, all our wonderful strategic partners. Greg Koukl for Stand to Reason. Give them heaven, friends. Bye-bye now.